In the middle of a busy high-class city, there was a huge building that looked like a palace. Inside, the air smelled like expensive perfume and old wood. This was the place where the best musicians in the world gathered. It was a special day because the great master was visiting. He was a pianist who was famous all over the globe. He was known for being very strict and for having ears that could hear even the tiniest mistake. People said he was a genius, but he was also known for being a little bit scary. If he didn't like your playing, he would stop you immediately. The room was packed with students. These students were not normal kids. They were rich, they were talented, and they had been trained in the best schools since they were 3 years old. They wore shiny shoes and fancy dresses. They sat with their backs very straight, holding their sheet music like it was made of gold. They all looked the same. They all acted like they already owned the stage. But there was one girl who was different from everyone else. Her name was Alara. She was sitting in the very back row, trying to make herself look small. She was wearing a simple blue dress that looked a bit old. Her shoes weren't shiny leather. They were just clean, ordinary black shoes. She didn't belong to a rich family. In fact, she had come from a very small house near the edge of the city. Her parents worked hard every day. They didn't have money for expensive music lessons. Alara had taught herself how to play. She had an old beat-up piano at home that was missing a few keys and sometimes went out of tune, but she loved that piano. Every day after school, while other kids played outside, Alara sat at her old instrument and pressed the keys. She played because it made her feel free. She played to forget about her problems. She didn't know the big fancy rules of music. She just played what her heart told her to play. Somehow, she had managed to get a ticket to sit in the back and watch the great master give his lesson. She was just supposed to watch and listen. She promised herself she wouldn't cause any trouble. She just wanted to see a real grand piano and hear a master play in real life. She held her breath as the great master walked onto the stage. He was an older man with silver hair and a very serious face. He sat down at the shiny grand piano and played a few notes. The sound was perfect, like crystal. Then the master looked out at the crowd of students. He looked bored. He had heard the same songs played the same way 1,000 times. He asked for a volunteer to come up and play a specific piece of music. It was a very hard piece, full of fast notes and tricky rhythms. The room went silent. All the students looked at each other, but nobody raised their hand. They were scared. They didn't want to make a mistake in front of the great master. The silence stretched on for a long time. The master sighed, looking disappointed. Alara didn't mean to raise her hand. It was like her hand moved on its own. Before she could think, she was holding her hand up in the air. The master's eyes scanned the room. He missed all the students in the front row because they were hiding their faces. Then he saw Alara in the back. He looked at her simple dress and her nervous face. He raised an eyebrow, surprised. He pointed a finger at her and waved for her to come up. Alara felt her heart jump into her throat. She stood up and her legs felt like jelly. As she walked down the aisle towards the stage, she could hear people whispering, "Who is she? Look at her shoes. She doesn't go to our academy." The words hurt, but she kept walking. She climbed the steps onto the stage. The lights were very bright, making it hard to see the audience. She could see the master sitting on his bench, watching her closely. She sat down at the big, expensive piano. It was much bigger than her old one at home. The keys felt smooth and cool under her fingers. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her shaking hands. She knew the song he asked for. She had heard it before and tried to play it by ear on her broken piano. But she had never played it on a real instrument. And she had never played in front of a crowd like this. The master crossed his arms. "Well," he said in a deep voice. "Don't keep us waiting, play." Alara placed her fingers on the keys. She wanted to show him that she was good. She wanted to prove that a girl from a small house could play just as well as the rich kids. But as soon as she touched the keys, her mind went blank. The pressure was too heavy. She could feel hundreds of eyes staring at the back of her neck. She pressed down to start the song, but her fingers slipped. A sour note rang out. She tried to fix it, but her panic made her hands heavy. She stumbled over the next few notes. The music didn't flow. It crashed. She stopped suddenly, the bad sound echoing in the huge room. Her face turned red with embarrassment. She thought the ground might open up and swallow her right there. The master was looking at her, but he wasn't smiling. The silence that followed her mistake was louder than any noise Alara had ever heard. In a room that big, you could hear a pin drop. That bad note hung in the air like a dark cloud, refusing to go away. Alara's hands froze over the keys. She wanted to start again, to fix the mess she had made, but her fingers just wouldn't move. It felt like they had turned into heavy stone. She could feel her heart beating so fast that it hurt her chest. The shiny, beautiful piano in front of her suddenly felt like a monster. It wasn't the friendly, familiar instrument she knew at home. It was a stranger that had betrayed her. Slowly, she turned her head to look at the master. She was hoping deep down that he would smile or nod. She hoped he would say it was okay, that everyone makes mistakes. But his face was like a statue. He didn't look kind anymore. His eyes were cold and sharp, staring right through her. He looked at his expensive gold watch, then back at her. He didn't say a word, but the message was clear. He was disappointed. He had better things to do than listen to a girl who couldn't even play 3 correct notes. The real pain didn't come from the master. It came from the crowd. The quiet whispers started up again, but this time they weren't just curious. They were mean. A boy in the front row, wearing a velvet jacket, let out a loud, fake cough to hide a laugh. A few girls behind him giggled behind their hands. To them, Alara wasn't a brave girl who tried her best. She was a joke. They were thinking, see? She doesn't belong here. She should have stayed in her little village. It felt good because she failed. It made them feel smarter and more important. Alara's face felt like it was on fire. Her cheeks were burning red, and her eyes started to water. She blinked hard, trying to keep the tears from falling. She knew that if she cried now, they would laugh even harder. She felt very small. Just 5 minutes ago, she had walked down the aisle feeling proud that she had raised her hand. Now, she just felt stupid. She wished the floor would crack open and swallow her up so she could disappear forever. The master stood up from his chair. The sound of the leather creaking seemed to echo in the hall. He walked over to where Alara was sitting. He didn't walk fast. He walked slowly, like he was a judge, delivering a sentence. When he reached the piano, he didn't ask her to try again. Instead, he reached out and gently pushed the lid of the piano down. It wasn't a slam, but it was firm. It was the sound of a door closing. "Enough," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried so much power that it hurt Alara's ears. Alara pulled her hands away from the keyboard as if she had touched a hot stove. She sat there, trembling, looking down at her lap. She couldn't bear to look at the people in the seats. She felt naked, like everyone could see her insecurities and her lack of training. The master looked down at her. "The piano," he began, speaking slowly so everyone could hear, "is not a toy. It is not something you play with because you like the noise. It requires discipline. It requires years of suffering and practice." He paused, looking at her simple dress and her worn-out shoes. "You have enthusiasm, I can see that. But enthusiasm is not enough. You are like a child trying to drive a car. It is dangerous for the music." Alara bit her lip. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. She felt like she was going to be sick. She felt humiliated. She thought about her father at home, working hard in the sun. She thought about how proud he would be if she played well. But now, she had let everyone down. She had proved the bullies right. She was just a fake. Perhaps the master continued, his voice sounding a little softer but still very cruel. "You should try a different hobby. Something easier. The stage is a cruel place for those who are not prepared." He waved his hand toward the exit. "Please, go. You are wasting the piano's time." That was the final blow. Being told she wasn't good enough was one thing, but being told she was wasting the piano's time? That broke her heart. She loved the piano more than anything in the world. To hear the master say that her love didn't matter was heartbreaking. The students in the audience didn't make a sound, but Alara could feel their satisfaction. They were enjoying watching her get crushed. It was like a sport to them. Alara slowly stood up. Her legs felt weak, like they were made of rubber. She didn't look at the master. She didn't look at the audience. She just kept her head down, staring at the wooden floor of the stage. She felt invisible, and yet painfully visible at the same time. Every step she took toward the edge of the stage felt like walking through deep mud. She felt the weight of 100 eyes burning into her back. When she reached the stairs, she almost tripped. A few people gasped, not because they were worried, but because it was another awkward moment to enjoy. She caught herself on the railing. She wanted to run. She wanted to sprint out of the building and never come back to the city, but she forced herself to walk. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her run away like a scared child. She walked with as much dignity as she could muster, even though she was dying inside on the inside. As she walked back up the long aisle toward the big double doors at the back, the whispers grew louder. "I told you she couldn't play. Did you see his face?" She was terrible. The words were like little stings. Elara kept her eyes straight ahead. She focused on the exit sign. It glowed red, looking like a giant eye warning her to get out. She reached the heavy wooden doors and pushed them open. The cool air from the lobby hit her face. It was a relief to be out of that room. She walked quickly through the lobby, past the fancy chandeliers and the expensive ticket booths. The security guard looked at her with a confused expression. He's probably wondering why a young girl was leaving the master class so early and looking so upset. Elara didn't stop. She pushed open the front doors of the building and stepped out into the street. Outside, the city was noisy. Cars were honking, people were shouting, and life was going on as normal. Nobody out here knew that a girl's dream had just been crushed. The sun was shining, which felt wrong to Elara. She thought it should be raining to match how she felt. She found a bench on the sidewalk and sat down. She put her head in her hands and finally let the tears come. She cried for her embarrassment. She cried because the master was mean. But mostly, she cried because she thought he was right. Maybe she wasn't good enough. Maybe her old broken piano at home was just a toy. Maybe she was fooling herself thinking she could ever be a real musician. The confidence she had felt just an hour ago was gone. It had been replaced by a heavy, dark doubt. She felt small, insignificant, and utterly alone in the middle of the big, busy city. Elara sat on the hard wooden bench outside the grand hall, watching the city life rush by. Cars zoomed past, and people chattered on their phones, laughing about dinners and movies. It felt strange to her. The world was still spinning, even though her world felt like it had stopped completely. She buried her face in her hands for a long time, letting the tears dry on her cheeks. The cool wind helped a little, but the burning feeling in her chest didn't go away. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the disappointed face of the master and heard the cruel laughs of the students. She felt a heavy weight pushing down on her shoulders. It was the weight of humiliation. She thought about getting on the next bus and going straight back to her small village. She could go home, hide in her room, and never play the piano again. That would be the easy thing to do. It would save her from ever feeling this kind of pain again. She imagined telling her parents that the class was canceled or that she was sick. She could just lie and protect her pride. But then, a small voice inside her head spoke up. It was a quiet voice, but it was strong. It reminded her of why she loved music in the first place. She didn't start playing to impress an old man in a suit. She didn't start playing to get applause from strangers. She started playing because when she was a little girl, the piano was the only place where she felt like herself. When she played, the tough times at home, the lack of money, and the struggles of daily life would disappear. The music was hers. It belonged to her heart. Elara stood up from the bench and took a deep breath. She wiped her face with her sleeve until it was dry. She looked back at the heavy doors of the concert hall. A part of her brain was screaming at her to run away, but her feet stayed planted on the ground. She realized something important. If she walked away now, the master would be right. He would be right to say she didn't belong. If she left, she was admitting that she was just a scared girl with a toy. No, she whispered to herself. I am not leaving like this. Without thinking too much, she turned around and walked back toward the entrance. The security guard was leaning against the wall, looking bored. When he saw Elara coming back, he looked surprised. He thought she had left for good. She didn't say a word to him. She just held her head a little higher and walked past him. Walking back into the building felt much harder than walking out. The lobby was quiet now, as the session was still going on inside the main hall. Her footsteps echoed loudly on the marble floor. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought it might explode. She felt scared, terrified really, but underneath the fear, there was a spark of anger. It wasn't a hateful anger. It was a righteous fire. She was angry that they judged her by her dress. She was angry that they thought they owned music. She reached the double doors of the concert hall. She put her hand on the cold metal handle and paused. She could hear the master speaking inside. He was lecturing the students about the importance of precision. His voice was smooth and arrogant. Alara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air, and pushed the door open. The heavy door creaked a little as it opened. At first, nobody noticed. The master had his back to the door, writing something on a whiteboard. The students were all looking at him, bored. Alara slipped into the back of the room. She didn't sit down this time. She stood in the shadows near the wall, her eyes locked onto the grand piano sitting on the stage. It looked lonely up there. It was a beautiful instrument waiting to be used. The master droned on and on about rules and techniques. Alara felt a sudden urge. It was like an itch she couldn't scratch. She knew she wasn't supposed to be on stage. She knew she would probably get thrown out. But she didn't care anymore. She had one chance to prove something to herself, not to them. She began to walk down the aisle. This time, her steps were firm. She didn't look at the floor. She looked straight at the stage. A student in the third row noticed her first. His eyes went wide and he nudged his friend. They turned around and stared. Then, a ripple went through the room. One by one, people noticed the girl in the blue dress walking back in. The whispers started immediately. Is she coming back? Why is she here? She must be crazy. The master heard the noise. He turned around, holding his marker. When he saw Alara walking down the aisle, his face turned red with annoyance. He couldn't believe it. He had just dismissed her. He had told her to leave. He thought she would be too ashamed to ever show her face again. "Excuse me," the master said, his voice loud and commanding. The room went instantly silent. Alara stopped walking at the bottom of the aisle, right in front of the stage. She looked up at him. She didn't look angry. She looked calm. "Strangely calm, young lady," the master said, stepping away from the whiteboard. "I believe I asked you to leave. This is a place for serious students. You are interrupting the class." Alara looked around the room at all the staring eyes. She saw the smug looks on the students' faces. They were waiting for her to be scolded again. They were enjoying the show. She looked back at the master. "I know you asked me to leave," Alara said. Her voice shook a little at first, but it got stronger as she spoke. "You said I wasn't good enough. You said I was wasting the piano's time?" "Yes, and I stand by that," the master said, crossing his arms. "So please go." Alara took a step up onto the stage. The master looked shocked that she dared to come closer. "You told me to leave because I couldn't play your song," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the hall. "You judged my heart by my hands. But my hands were shaking because I was scared of you, not because of the music." She walked past him. The smell of his expensive cologne hit her, but she didn't flinch. She walked right up to the piano bench. The audience was gasping now. No one had ever defied the master like this. He was about to grab her arm and stop her, but something in her eyes made him pause. She wasn't looking at him with hatred. She was looking at him with pity. "I am going to play one more time," Alara said softly. "Not the song you gave me. I am going to play a song I know, and then I will leave." The master opened his mouth to shout, to call security, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. It wasn't just a tantrum. It was a challenge. He stood frozen for a split second, his curiosity getting the better of his anger. He wanted to see what this foolish girl could possibly do. Alara sat down on the bench. She was shaking again, but it was different this time. She wasn't shaking because she was afraid of messing up the notes. She was shaking because of the energy rushing through her body. She closed her eyes for a moment. She blocked out the lights, the master, the students, and the fancy room. In her mind, she wasn't in a concert hall. She was back in her small, dusty living room. She was sitting at her old, broken piano. She placed her hands on the keys. They were cool and steady. She took a breath, and then she began to play. The moment Alara's fingers touched the keys, the entire atmosphere in the hall shifted. She didn't start with the fancy, fast notes that the other students usually played to show off. She started with a single, deep chord. It wasn't a chord from a book. It was a sound that felt like the earth cracking open, or a storm gathering far away. The sound was so rich and heavy that it seemed to vibrate right through the floorboards and into the feet of the people sitting in the front row. The master, who had been standing with his arms crossed, ready to scold her, suddenly froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He had expected to hear the messy stumbling of a nervous amateur again. Instead, he heard a sound that commanded absolute silence. Alara didn't read any music. There was no sheet music on the stand. She closed her eyes, and her hands began to move on their own. She wasn't thinking about scales or rules. She wasn't thinking about where her thumbs were supposed to go. She was playing a melody that she knew by heart, a song that had grown inside her like a weed pushing through concrete. It was a tune from her childhood, something her grandmother used to hum while cleaning the house, but Alara had transformed it. She had added the anger she felt today, the sadness of being poor, and the fire of her dreams. The music was not polite. It was raw. It was loud and aggressive in some parts, hitting the keys with a force that made the piano strings rattle. Then, in a blink, it would become soft and gentle, like a whisper or a lullaby. It was a story of struggle. The people in the audience stopped looking at their phones. They stopped whispering. They sat up straight in their seats, their eyes glued to the girl in the simple blue dress. For the first few minutes, the master looked annoyed. He looked at his watch, thinking this was just a tantrum. He didn't like music that broke the rules. He liked music that was neat and perfect. But as the song went on, his annoyance faded. His eyebrows furrowed together, and he took a small step closer to the piano. He was listening. No, really listening. He heard a mistake. A technical error. Her timing was slightly off in a complicated run. According to his textbooks, she was playing it wrong. But somehow it didn't sound wrong. The way she hesitated on that note made it sound like the music was heartbroken. It made it sound human. The master looked around the room. He saw the wealthy students, the ones who played perfectly every time, looking confused. They could play the notes, but they couldn't figure out how she was making the piano sing. They were playing with their brains. Alara was playing with her guts. The room felt like it was holding its breath. The lights seemed to dim, even though they hadn't changed. The only thing that existed was the sound coming from the instrument. Alara was lost in it. She wasn't thinking about the humiliation she suffered 10 minutes ago. She was pouring all of that pain into the keys, turning her embarrassment into something beautiful. Every time she remembered the students laughing, she struck the keys harder. Every time she remembered the master's cold voice, she made the music soar higher and higher. Her hands were moving so fast now that they were almost a blur. She was hitting the bass notes with her left hand, creating a thundering rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. Then her right hand would dance lightly on the high notes, like rain falling on a roof. The contrast was mesmerizing. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was a conversation. It felt like she was arguing with the piano, fighting with it, and then making friends with it, all in the same minute. The master took another step closer. He was standing right next to the piano now. He was a man who had heard thousands of pianists in his life. He had heard the best players in the world in grand concert halls in London, New York, and Tokyo. But he realized, with a sudden jolt, that he had never heard this. He had never heard someone play with such total abandon. He had taught his students to protect the instrument, to treat it gently. Alara was treating the piano like a living thing that needed to wake up. She was challenging it. He watched her face. Her eyes were still closed, and a small smile played on her lips. It wasn't a smile for the audience. It was a private smile. She was remembering her old broken piano at home. She realized in that moment that she didn't need this shiny Steinway to make music. The music was inside her. The piano was just a tool. The master felt a strange sensation in his chest, a feeling of respect. He was witnessing a rare kind of courage. The song built up to a climax. It was chaotic and loud, filling every corner of the massive hall. The sound was so big that it seemed to shake the dust off the ceiling. The students in the back row covered their ears, not because it was bad, but because it was overpowering. It was too much emotion to handle all at once. It felt like she was pouring her entire life out in 5 minutes. Then, just as the music reached a point where it felt like it might explode, Alara pulled back. She slowed down. The chaos turned into a calm, flowing river of notes. It was like the sun coming out after a heavy storm. The tension in the room dissolved. The music became simple and clear. It was a melody of forgiveness. She wasn't angry at the master anymore. She was just grateful that she had this chance. She played the final notes. They were soft, delicate, and clear. Letting them ring out, she lifted her hands off the keys. She placed them gently in her lap. She sat there for a moment, breathing hard. The sweat was dripping down her forehead. Her heart was pounding like a drum. Slowly, the silence of the room rushed back in. But it wasn't the empty silence of before. It was a heavy, shocked silence. The air felt electric, like static after a lightning strike. Alara opened her eyes. She looked down at her hands, almost surprised to see them there. She had been in a trance. She felt drained, but also lighter, like a heavy stone had been lifted off her shoulders. She waited to hear the laughter. She waited for the master to yell at her for touching the piano again. But there was nothing. Just the sound of her own breathing in the quiet hall. She slowly turned her head to look at the master. He hadn't moved. He was standing right next to her, looking at the piano keys as if they had just done something magical. He looked stunned. His face, usually so pale and serious, was flushed. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, but in a good way. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked awakened. Lara took a deep breath and stood up from the bench. She thought that now she had played her song, she would have to leave. She had done what she came to do. She turned to walk away, thinking her time was finally up. But as she took a step, the master moved. He reached out a hand, not to stop her, but to gesture to her. He looked at the audience, then back at her. His face had completely changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a look of pure wonder. He was about to do something no one in that room expected. As Alara took a step away from the piano bench, she felt the reality of the situation rushing back in. Her legs were trembling from the adrenaline, and her hands felt cold and clammy. She thought her moment was over. She had played her heart out, said what she needed to say, and now she fully expected to be escorted out by security. She kept her head down, looking at the polished wooden floor, preparing herself for the walk of shame back to her small village. She thought the master would be furious that she had disobeyed him, or perhaps even worse, that he would just laugh and tell her she was crazy. But then she heard a sound. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't the sound of a door opening. Clap. It was a single, sharp clap. It echoed through the silent hall like a gunshot. Alara froze in her tracks. She slowly turned around, confused. The master was standing right next to the piano, looking at his own hands. He had just clapped once. Then he did it again. Clap. He looked up at Alara, and his eyes were completely different. The coldness, the arrogance, and the boredom were all gone. In their place was a look of profound respect. He wasn't clapping slowly or sarcastically. He was clapping with a steady, heavy rhythm. Clap, clap, clap. The students in the audience were paralyzed. They didn't know what to do. They looked at the master, then at Alara, then back at the master. They had never seen the master applaud a student who had broken the rules. Usually, he threw people out for being disrespectful. But here he was, applauding this girl in the simple blue dress. Slowly, one by one, the students began to join in. At first, it was just a few people unsure of themselves. But then, the applause grew. It swept through the room like a wave. Within seconds, The entire hall was thundering with clapping and cheering. The sound was deafening, stark contrast to the judgmental silence Ilara had faced just 20 minutes ago. Ilara stood there on the stage, completely stunned. She pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. She couldn't believe it. These were the same people who had been laughing at her. Now they were on their feet, some of them even shouting "Bravo." It felt like a dream. The master held up his hand to silence the crowd. They quieted down immediately, eager to hear what he had to say. He walked over to Ilara. He was a tall, imposing man. But as he stood in front of her, he didn't seem scary anymore. He looked humbled. "My dear," he said, his voice soft and sincere, "I have been teaching music for 40 years. I have taught thousands of students how to play every note perfectly. I have taught them how to stand, how to breathe, and how to move their fingers like machines. And in all those years, I have rarely heard what I've just heard." He paused and looked out at the crowd of students. "You all play the notes," he said to them. "But she played the truth. You play with your heads, worried about making mistakes. She just played with her soul. I told her she wasn't ready because she stumbled. I was a fool. I was listening for perfection. I should have been listening for life." He turned back to Ilara. "I dismissed you because I judged you by your appearance and your nerves. I was wrong. You have a gift that cannot be taught in a school. You have a voice that is uniquely yours. Please forgive an old man for his arrogance." Ilara felt tears rolling down her cheeks again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief and joy. She had spent her whole life feeling like she wasn't good enough because she didn't have the money or the training. Now, the greatest pianist in the world was telling her that her way was valid. It was the most incredible moment of her life. The master didn't stop there. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a fancy card. It was his personal business card. He handed it to Ilara. "I am not just going to let you go back to that village and hide," he said with a small smile. "I have connections. I want you to come and study with me. Not as a charity case, but as a real student. But there is one condition." Ilara looked at the card, her hands shaking. "What is the condition?" She whispered. "The condition is," the master said gently, "that you never stop playing the way you just did. Don't let me turn you into a robot. Keep your fire. Keep your anger. Keep your heart. That is what makes you a musician." The crowd erupted into applause again, louder this time. Ilara looked out at the sea of faces. The boy who had coughed earlier was now looking at the floor, ashamed of himself. The girls who had giggled were now looking at her with envy, but a different kind of envy, because she was rich. But because she was talented, Illa realized that she didn't need to prove anything to them anymore. She knew who she was. She walked back to the center of the stage and bowed deeply. It wasn't a bow of submission. It was a bow of gratitude. She thanked the master. She thanked the piano. And she thanked the music that had saved her. When she finally walked off the stage and out of the concert hall, the sun was beginning to set over the city. The sky was painted with beautiful colors of orange and purple. The air felt fresh and clean. Ilara held the business card tight in her hand. She knew her life was about to change completely. She would have lessons. She would have nice clothes. And she would travel the world. But she knew that no matter how famous she became, she would never forget the girl she was today. She would never forget that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. As she walked toward the bus station, she didn't feel invisible anymore. She walked with her head up, her step light. She was ready to go home and tell her parents everything. She was ready to face her future. The girl who had been dismissed had returned, but she wasn't the victim anymore. She was a star, and the best part was, she had shocked them all, especially herself.